This story is about a writer. Once, he heard a faint knock, and then I saw a terrible creature with sharp teeth, yellow eyes, and a dreadful smile. What will happen next? Listen and then you'll find out. I've been living in a fifth wheel on my recently purchased property. The goal was to build a home on the 2 acres of land, but the weather didn't agree with that. I live in rural Nevada, and the weather conditions in winter can really throw a wrench in any construction plans you may have. Between the snow and the 50 miles per hour winds, winter just wasn't an optimal time to build. Nonetheless, I still have my fifth wheel and generator to keep me up and running through the cold months. It's pretty peaceful, actually. Between the howling wind and the rain on the tin-like roof, it's like my very own ASMR. That's usually how I fall asleep, listening to the therapeutic sounds of nature. Tonight is different. There was a mild case of wind and a light drizzle, but the quiet came before I could drift off. The sound of a herding dog who lives across the way is barking at what I assume is his flock of sheep. I toss and turn, but the incessant barking is refusing me rest. I'm irritated. I understand the dog is just doing his job, but in order for me to be on time to my job in the morning, I need to be able to sleep. The bark is hollow. There is little urgency from the dog, and he sounds more like an old man coughing. It's a low woof, and it happens every 3 seconds. I imagine him nipping at heels, nudging the sheep into the direction they need to go. Eventually, the barking seems to stop and I'm able to doze off. When I wake, it is not from my alarm. Unfortunately, the same old tired herding dog is barking again. I pick up my phone and see that it's 4 a.m. Okay, well, I'd have to be up in an hour for work anyway, and trying to fall back asleep with this noise would be pointless. I get up and start to brew my coffee. I'm listening to the rhythm of the dog's bark. Woof, woof, woof. Woof, woof, woof. He sounds like he hates his job. Me too, bud. I turn on the TV and put on a comfort movie from Netflix to drown out the animal. As though he knows I have tuned him out, his barking picks up. I roll my eyes and curse to myself. This is starting to really get under my skin. I crack the window and yell, "Shut up." Before I can shut the window, however, I notice something. It's something small, but nevertheless it's there. The dog sounds more urgent now. He seems alarmed, and instead of the usual cough like woof I was hearing, it sounds more like a panicked and biting bark. He's facing away from the flock, and I try to make out the image before me that is clouded by morning mist and lack of sunlight. In the field of uneven grass and strewn about feed, there's a figure. It's just crouched behind a half-eaten bale of hay. The dog and sheep are in the opposite far corner, clearly unsure about the shape that has entered their land. I try to force my eyes to focus, but between the bale of hay blocking it and the lack of proper sunlight, my eyes refuse to adjust. My heart pounds with anxiousness. Is this what the dog has been barking at? This person? Is it a person? It has to be. It has a very round head and a long neck and shoulders as far as I can tell. That's a person, right? Before I can stare any longer, I close my window. I know farmers get up early, so maybe the shape I'm seeing is one of them just laying out the feed. Maybe their children saw me and crouched down to hide their embarrassment. I rationalize as much as I can. I sat still in the near silence, just convincing my mind that whatever it was human. Maybe it's an intruder, and that's why the dog was so distraught. Should I call the police? But what if it was a farmer? I decide I'm being too dramatic. I'm going to look again and make sure that what I saw was one of the people who own the land. I refuse to allow my brain to get the better of me. I just really need to build my courage back up to crack the window and peek out. I'm ashamed to say it has taken me what feels like an hour to gain the mettle to look outside. I think what has helped me finally build said courage is the fact that the dog has stopped barking. I know I should have done something before this point, but the comfort of knowing the dog no longer sees a threat is what pushed me to finally follow through. I slowly crack the window and look out. It's a little brighter now, with the sun pulling oranges and pinks into the sky. The field is empty, thankfully. The only residents are the sheep, who are now back to the center of the field, and the dog. Good. Now I can go to work and forget that any of this happened. And that's exactly what I do. Work was boring as work usually is. I hardly thought of the dog or the person I saw in the field. It's easy once time goes by to convince yourself of what actually happened. I looked out and saw a shape. That's all. No monster of the night, no killer awaiting ambush. I just saw a shape, and am not even sure if that's what I saw either. It could have been nothing. A shadow in the field. So that's what I go with, nothing has happened. As I pull into my dirt driveway, I look across the field. I smile to myself seeing the sheep graze the grass and the dog laying against the fence line peacefully. What a fool I have been. I am a grown man and I allowed a little dog's bark to terrify me over essentially nothing. I go inside my trailer and make myself a package of ramen for dinner and pair it with a glass of sweet tea. Not a 5-star meal, but really it's all I have energy for after the lack of sleep I got last night. I eat my ramen, drink my tea, and watch my shows as the hours slip past me and the day creeps into night. I start to feel anxious. What will I do if I hear the barking again? What if they or it is out there again? I try to rationalize and laugh it off, but fear is stronger than logic, and as we descend into night, my mind descends into panic. I decide to sleep on the pull-out futon in the living room area of my fifth wheel. At least this way I'll have the illumination and sound from the TV to muffle any noise outside my trailer. I make my bed and turn on a TV show I've seen 1,000 times. I allow myself to drift off. When I awake with a panic. The kind of panic you get when you know someone is standing inches from your face, watching, waiting. The TV has timed out and the illumination the dim screen adds to the space is eerie. I sit up and look around as my chest struggles for breath that somehow escapes me. I scan my head from the kitchen area back to the futon. Nothing. I relax a little, getting up to turn my show back on. As I do, I double-check that my door is locked and all windows are closed. I'm ashamed to admit that when checking the windows, I squint my eyes, avoiding any possibility of seeing something I would rather not see. As I check the last window next to the futon, something unfortunately catches my eye. It was quick and brief to the point that I wasn't even sure that it was ever really there. But I think I saw something peek out at me from behind the tree in my yard. I didn't get a great look, but it seemed like whatever it was had an unnaturally round head with 2 glowing eyes. I slam the window cover down and lay back down, chest once again heaving. I didn't see anything, I tell myself. Your mind plays tricks on you when you're already panicked. I do my best to focus on the TV, but like an itch in the back of my brain I hear my own small panicked voice. It's gotten closer. It's no longer across the street. It's here, for us. What does it want with me? Will it try to get in? The panic eventually subsides as I convince myself that what I saw was probably my own reflection or shadow. I decided that is what it had to be. I don't look out to look again though, to be sure. I just drift into sleep, dreaming of glowing eyes and howling wind. When I wake, everything seems normal. I make myself a cup of coffee and a bagel. I go through the motions of preparing for my day, and when I get to work, I go through the motions of being an employee. I don't necessarily have a bad day, but it feels like I'm stuck on autopilot. I chalk it up to lack of sleep. Today is Friday, which means I will be stuck at home for 2 days. I'm scared that without the distraction of work, I may go insane trying to ignore the glowing eyes that I keep trying to convince myself I didn't see. I arrived home once again and put on some sweats. I turn on the TV and make a cup of hot tea. I don't eat dinner. My stomach churns as I feel like I am waiting for the inevitable. My eyes dart around the trailer waiting to see something move. My ears perk up with any hint of noise. Relaxation feels impossible. I don't even lay down today. Instead, I sit at the edge of my futon and watch TV with wired, bloodshot eyes. After about 2 hours of absolutely nothing, I decided I can lay back and relax, just a little. I don't decide on sleep as sleep isn't an option. Even if I was tired, which I am not, the panic in my chest would refuse me any rest. It's about 2 a.m. when I hear it. A slight knock on my door. My eyes dart to the trailer door and lock in as if I'm trying to shoot lasers out of my eyes and into whatever is standing on the other side. I don't get up and open the door. I've seen enough horror movies to know what happens after that. I just sit and wait. I hear another low, consistent tapping noise, this time coming from the window beside me. My head whips to the side as I jump off of the couch. I just stand and stare, waiting. Another tap, this time in threes. There is no mistaking the noise. It's as if someone is intentionally trying to gain my attention. Tap, tap, tap. I crouch down onto the floor holding my head in my hands. I want to scream. I want it to leave me alone. But I don't want to acknowledge its existence. Tap, tap, tap. I start to chew on my nails. Tap, tap, tap. This time it's coming from the door again, ruling out any possibility that the tap on the window was a tree branch or something more logical than a creature of the night. Rap, rap, rap. The taps have turned into banging now. Loud knocks that beg for me to open the door. I refuse. Then, I hear something else. A giggle, low and almost like a gurgle. It sounds as if someone tried to laugh with a mouthful of water. At this point, I'm sweating and shaking. I can't help myself. I'm exhausted and terrified. I'm not thinking straight. Leave me alone, I scream. For a moment, nothing happens. It's quiet, almost too quiet. I reach for my cell phone to call the police, but before I can, the trailer shakes. I squint my eyes shut as I hear the window cover roll up in a quick whip of motion. I can't look outside. I can't look outside. I can't look outside. I'm rocking back and forth, whispering a slurred reminder to myself. Minutes pass and that's when temptation takes over. I don't know what it is about the human brain, but anytime you tell yourself you must not do something, the need to do the opposite overpowers your mind. I squint my eyes. I need to close the shades, I silently tell myself. But I needed to see. I needed to see if it was really there or if I was just going insane. I count to 3 and open my eyes. I almost scream at what appears before me, but nothing escapes my lips. Standing on the other side of my window is the most terrifying thing I have ever laid eyes on. The head is so round and smooth. The eyes are so metallic yellow, reflecting all the light coming out of my trailer. Its skinny neck looks so unproportionate to the head it has to carry around. The nose is just a single U-shaped slit. The mouth though, oh god, the mouth. It has 3 times the amount of normal teeth, all appearing human. Its smile is so wide that it takes up the majority of this thing's face. You can see every tooth from its smile alone. And it is just staring right at me and smiling. I don't move. I freeze like a deer in headlights and can hear my brain screaming at my legs to move, to run, to do anything but stand here and let this thing see me. But it already has. It slowly leans its head forward. Before I have any time to react, it bangs its head against the window. It does it again and again. It's trying to get in. The fear in my body finally turns to fight. I grab my old revolver from my TV stand and manage to load 3 bullets in. Without thinking, I ran outside and face it down. Leave me alone, I scream. It slowly turns away from the trailer and towards me, still smiling with a tar-like substance oozing from its forehead. I aim my weapon and pull the trigger and it falls with a thud. Relief floods my body and without hesitation, I squeeze the trigger 2 more times to be sure the thing is dead. I almost laugh to myself. It's done. It's finally done. I reach for my cell phone to call the police and let them know that I killed this thing on my property. As I stick my hand in my pocket, I soon realize I left my phone inside. I turn around to go back inside, but as I do, I see a bunch of tiny lights appear around my trailer. I start to walk forward, gun still in hand, to see what these lights could be. As I approach them, I start to make out a very round head and a very tiny neck. These aren't lights. These are hundreds of reflective eyes staring back at me. I turn to run back to my front door, but see that through the window, 3 of them are already in my home. They just stand there, smiling at me. I drop to my knees and feel something on my shoulder. I look to the side and see that it is a hand with long bony fingers and inch-long nails. I know that I can't run. I assume they are everywhere now. I feel the nails sink into my skin and I let out a cry. I really shouldn't have looked outside. I found a red VHS tape in my grandma's collection. What I saw still terrifies me. I used to spend a lot of time at my grandma's house. She didn't quite raise me, but with how often my mom was in and out of jail or rehab, she may as well have. That's not to say my childhood was bad though. Maybe it wasn't as good as some had, but I got to spend a lot of time with my cousins when they visited. The house was in a beautiful spot on the edge of the woods, and Grandma really knew how to cook. I enjoyed my childhood, and no one can take that away from me. In fact, I really only had one truly bad experience in the years I spent at my grandma's house. The day started out better than most. It was in the early summer, so I was out of school, and the days hadn't gotten unbearably hot yet. My two cousins, Thomas and Isabel, had spent the previous night at Grandma's with me. We woke up all strung out on the couch in the family room because we'd stayed up the night before watching a bunch of old movies. After a hearty pancake and sausage breakfast, we went to the pool, and then back to the house to play near the woods. That's when Grandma started calling for us from the back deck. She chastised us for leaving VHS tapes all over the family room floor and not cleaning up after ourselves. "Can't we clean up after our game?" we pleaded. "I'm going out to drop off some things at your grandfather's work. Then I'm going to the store for supper ingredients. If I get back, and that room isn't clean, we know, Grandma." We called back. She clicked her tongue at us, but smiled and walked to the car. I don't remember all the games we were playing, only that my younger cousin, Isabel, stopped wanting to participate because we were spending too much time in the woods. They weren't scary or anything. The coniferous forest was always magical to me. In the autumn, the woods were filled with pine cones and acorns for me to collect. In the spring, it was populated by herds of young white-tailed deer. And especially in the winter, the snow coverage made my grandma's backyard look like the cover of a Christmas CD. Isabel loved the woods as much as Thomas and I did, but for some reason today she kept her distance. Regardless of her hesitation, we would have headed in anyway because soon dark gray clouds began to roll in from the hills. The water droplets began to cover the windows as we shuffled through the piles of VHS tapes we'd left on the floor. We hadn't watched most of them the night before, but like young kids do, we'd taken a bunch out and left them scattered looking for ones we could agree on. Isabel was only 5 and couldn't really read yet, so it was up to Thomas and I to match most of the tapes to their proper cases. In case you didn't grow up around them, most of the VHS tapes were black. That was the standard color. Occasionally there would be some with the top strip a different color, and even rarer were the fully colored ones that we had. I say this not just to recall a bit of nostalgia from an age of simpler tech, but also to highlight why what happened next was so strange. You see, with how rare colored VHS tapes were, we knew exactly which ones we had. 2 orange ones and a blue one. Ironically, the blue one wasn't Blue's Clues, that was one of the orange ones along with Rugrats. The blue one was Monsters Incorporated. But that afternoon, as the storm really started to lay in thick and the view out the windows was obstructed near completely, Isabel handed me a tape and asked me which one it went to. I was confused not only because I had never seen the dark red VHS tape before, but because the writing on the front was something I couldn't read. "Hey, Thomas, check this out. Can you read it?" Thomas looked as confused as I was. Indeed, neither of us had remembered ever seeing the VHS before, and we wouldn't have forgotten such a distinct hue. Thomas assured me I wasn't crazy and that the writing on the tape couldn't have been English. We decided we'd watch it to figure it out. Although she denied it, we figured Isabel had just gotten another VHS tape off the shelf when we weren't looking and liked the color of it. Thomas popped the tape into the player and I turned on the TV. At first, we thought it didn't work. The screen was just black with the exception of the text on the edges of the screen, which suggested the tape was homemade. All the letters were in that weird writing though, one that I was certain didn't even share the same alphabet as English. We were about to take it out when I noticed the numbers in the timestamp were going up, meaning that it was working and whoever had filmed the video was only filming in the dark. It's probably some old home movie Grandma recorded and just left the camera going overnight or something. Why would it be written like that though? Maybe we should just rewind it to find out. I agreed with Thomas that rewinding the tape made the most sense. I hit the button on the player and went to sit back on the couch next to my cousins. I had expected the tape to take a while to rewind considering the working theory was Grandma leaving the camera on overnight, but not long after I settled and I heard the distinctive click of the tape reaching the beginning. Thomas and I shared a confused look as I got up again to press play. The first scene was of the ground on the edge of the highway. Whoever was recording was clearly walking down the road. My suspicions that they were hitchhiking were confirmed as the next scene came up of the cameraman getting into the cab of a long-haul semi-truck. The trucker looked into the camera and smiled. He was an older man with a salt and pepper beard and a healthy-sized potbelly. Making a documentary or something. Something like that was the first thing we had heard the cameraman say. The tone was cheery, like he was clearly obliged to finally get off his feet and into a vehicle. He also had an accent belonging to somewhere that my fourth-grade mind couldn't place. The scene continued with the cameraman and the trucker having a friendly conversation. The cameraman placed the camcorder on the dash of the truck, pointed out onto the highway ahead of them. It didn't take long for us to get bored at this, and I decided to fast-forward the tape. The scene lasted some time, and I watched the sun on the horizon dip below the treeline and the cool evening sky take place on the screen. Then the camcorder began to shift, and I stopped the rewind. The camera turned to film the trucker as he walked into a gas station in the middle of nowhere. Or so I thought. "Hey, that's the truck stop on the edge of town," Thomas said. I looked more closely and realized he was right. It was the truck stop a few miles out of town that Grandma would always stop at to fill up and get snacks whenever we'd go on road trips. As soon as the trucker got into the shop, the cameraman began to search through his belongings. He unzipped duffel bags and opened shelves, pocketing random things as he went. I hurried to sit back down on the couch next to my cousin so that I could get a better angle of the screen. It wasn't long before we heard of what's going on from the screen. The trucker had returned and wasn't happy to see what his guest was up to. A skirmish broke out between the cameraman and the trucker. At least that's what I gathered, as the camcorder was dropped almost immediately, so all I heard was the noise of a brawl as the screen showed the dusty underside of the passenger seat. The sounds of the fight went from unnerving to disturbing quickly. Neither was screaming or yelling anymore, but one was unmistakably choking, gasping for air and struggling to breath. The screen began to shake to the rhythm of one of the men kicking the passenger seat, clinging onto a hope of life. Isabel grabbed my hand and whispered, "I'm scared." "It's okay," I assured her, not very assured myself. "It's just a scary movie. It's not real." Isabel buried her face in my side, and I welcomed the contact. I grabbed Thomas's hand and squeezed. We shared a look that signaled what we both knew. If this was a horror movie, why was that the truck stop we knew so well? The noises on screen stopped. Isabel began to lift her head to look again, but I held her head in place. The cameraman fished the camcorder from under the seat and pointed it straight at the lifeless truck driver. Thomas and I screamed. He lay awkwardly on the mattress of the cabin. His face was purple and his eyes were bloodshot. Then the camera turned, and for the first time we saw the identity, or lack thereof, of the man behind the film. He wore a wooden face mask. It was fashioned to look like an old man with a big, bulbous nose and sad, wrinkled eyes. Gray yarn was attached around all of it to give the impression of long disheveled hair and a matching beard. The scene cut. Now it was nothing but trees. Isabel asked us what happened, but we didn't speak. She fought me to see the screen again, and this time I didn't resist. Trees. Nothing but trees and dirt, and then it hit me. It was all too familiar. The grass, the trees, the pine cones and acorns. It was the woods behind the house. My gaze darted out the window to the treeline. The heavy rainfall distorted the forest. What I once considered to be a wonderland was now a mystery. Then I heard Grandma. But not from the front door, not from the hallway, from the screen. Thomas gripped my hand so tightly it hurt. Isabel began to tear up. "I'm going out to drop off some things at your grandfather's work." My heart dropped. The camera's point of view was from the woods looking into the backyard. It focused on the deck where my grandma spoke to us, and then panned down to show me. My heart began to race as I saw the back of my head on the TV in front of me. Thomas stood next to me, and Isabel looked right into the camera. She looked confused, as if she didn't know what she was seeing. On screen, Thomas and I began to play tag, and I witnessed the moment in my life I came closest to death. As I ran from Thomas, the first ran right past the cameraman, who moved the camcorder to follow my path. My heart was louder than the screen. My throat was so tight I almost couldn't breathe. Then the cameraman began to move. Not towards us, but towards the house. He filmed as he made his way right into the family room. He filmed the VHS tapes sprawled along the floor and chuckled. Then my grandma came back into the house, forgetting something, and the man darted into the closet to hide. "Thomas," I whispered. He looked at me, and the same realization dawned on him. The screen was black. The same black screen that we saw when we first put the tape in. But worse than that, the closet he hid in was the same one I had been standing next to so many times today. Every time I got up to rewind or fast forward, I was only feet away. Thomas and I looked over at the closet now, and we saw the door ajar. And in the darkness, a wooden nose and frayed gray yarn. All I remember was screaming and running as fast as I could with Isabel and Thomas next to me. We hurried up to the second floor, then into the attic. We hid away in a crawl space and prayed the man wouldn't find us. After what felt like hours, we heard footsteps. The creak of movement up the old, wooden stairs. I closed my eyes and sobbed. The door to the crawl space opened and we all screamed. "What has gotten into you three?" asked my grandma. And the whole world came back. We stumbled over our words explaining it to her. I doubt she understood, but she took our testimony seriously. Grandma opened the gun safe and pulled out one of her husband's rifles. "Stay here and I'll be back." It didn't take her long. Once she was sure no one was in the house, she got us and had us recall our story on the couch of the family room. I think she believed us, but the police couldn't do anything. The closet was open, but there was no man in a wooden mask, the dark red VHS tape wasn't in the player, and no trace of him was found in the woods. It took a while, but life returned to normal. School was back in session before I knew it. Homework began to take more importance in my mind than that afternoon. Pretty soon it felt surreal, and as I got older I began to doubt if what we saw was even real. Only 3 things told me that it was, though. Isabel and Thomas had always recalled the exact same scenario I had. When we got older, my grandmother had admitted that a murder had taken place at the truck stop not long before the incident. And the 3rd thing happened most recently. I have it again. I'm now older. I live alone in a different town, but just this afternoon I got it. Outside of my door was the same dark red VHS tape. I have called the police, and in the meantime I sit here writing this story down while simultaneously looking behind my back every few seconds. And at the same time I can't help but glance at the old VHS player on my TV stand. I don't know if I should watch the tape. My friends and I made a deal with a voice in the sewer. Now we're all paying the price. I grew up in the kind of Rust Belt town where the cleanest, safest place for kids to play was the local sewer canal. My friends Brett, Holly, Eli, and I met there almost every day during summer vacation. The overhanging trees gave us shade and hid us from the adults. It was like our own secret hideout. The only problem was the concrete tunnel at the end of it. Something about the tunnel made me think of a round, toothless stone mouth. Freakishly oversized insects that we'd never seen before buzzed in the humid breeze that blew out of the darkness, and it wasn't long before we started daring each other to crawl inside. Eli was the first to stick his head in, but he didn't dare to go any further. Holly, though, did. She snorted, called us all scarcely cats, and crawled into the tunnel until only her tiny white shoe still hung outside of it. Then she screamed, the kind of 100-decibel shriek that only preteen girls are capable of. We grabbed her leg and yanked her out. She wouldn't stop scratching at her head. According to Holly, a spider as big as her hand had just scurried through her hair. We avoided the tunnel for a long time after that. Until the day I lost Eli's basketball. It wasn't technically Eli's. It belonged to his older brother Dwayne, a muscly 13-year-old we all lived in terror of. In fact, the ball was Dwayne's most prized possession. Eli had only taken it to brag about the famous signatures that covered it, but like the dumb kids we were, we couldn't resist throwing it around. I faked a pass to Brett, but tossed it to Eli instead. I didn't realize he was standing in front of the tunnel. Dwayne's prized ball slipped right through Eli's fingers and disappeared into the darkness. One look at Eli's terrified face was all I needed to imagine the beating that Dwayne would give us. No one was saying it, but I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath, got down on my hands and knees, and crawled into the tunnel. The legs of a flying insect brushed against my ear. Trying to climb inside, I cried out, smacked the side of my head, and nearly slipped in the slime beneath my legs. Something more than the bugs and muck was bothering me. The tunnel was flat. How could the ball have rolled so far? Unless something had carried it. My friends were cheering me on, but their voices sounded very far away. I shuddered and kept moving. After what felt like forever, I saw light up ahead. It streamed down through a grate overhead into a small concrete chamber. Dwayne's basketball rolled through it and into the gloom beyond. I had just stepped into the light when I heard it bounce. Bounce. Looking for this? A voice asked from the shadows. Every instinct told me to scream and run. But I didn't. "Who's there?" I asked. "Do you want your ball back?" the voice teased, or not. I couldn't tell if the speaker was male or female, old or young. The darkness hid them completely. "Of course I do." I huffed. "Then how about a trade? You get what you want, and I get something of yours." "Like what?" "Bounce. Bounce. I'll tell you when the time is right." "Not now." It was only a basketball, I told myself. How big of a trade could it be? "Okay, fine. Gimme the ball." Just like that, my trade came bouncing out off the shadows. "It's been a pleasure. If you'd ever like to trade for anything else, you know where to find me." I gulped and backed away, my throat dry. I didn't want to turn my back to whatever was lurking in the shadows, but I didn't have a choice. I looked up as I turned around. Two backlit, child-sized figures were staring down into the grate. I scrambled out of the horrible tunnel as quickly as I could. "You found it." Eli's cheer died in his throat when he saw my face. "What's wrong?" "Now I've got something of yours. Something I've been wanting for a long time." I opened my mouth, ready to tell him everything. "Nothing," I found myself saying. "Where's Brett and Holly?" "They climbed up on top of the grate to spy on you," Eli frowned. "Are you sure you're okay?" "Never better." I forced myself to smile, wondering why I couldn't bring myself to talk about what I'd found. "How about a trade? You get something of mine, and I get something of yours." Laying in bed that night, I turned those words over and over in my head as I listened to the windstorm outside. What kind of deal had I just made? When would the thing from the sewer be coming to collect? Branches scraped against the house like sharpened claws, and it was a long time before I was able to fall asleep. I woke to golden sunlight streaming through my bedroom window. I could hear my family arguing and laughing in the kitchen. The warm, buttery smell of my father's pancakes drifted up the stairs. Maybe things would be okay, after all. Or so I thought. But something had changed between my friends and I. When we met back at the sewer the next day, Brett and Holly seemed tense, anxious even. Like they were waiting for Eli and I to leave. We parted ways after barely an hour had passed. The whole experience left me with a sick sense of foreboding, although I wasn't sure why. The next day, when we met again, I understood. Brett was hunched over and concentrating, driving a brand new remote control truck. It was a toy that his family could never have afforded, yet here it was, zooming up and down the slopes of the canal. Holly watched, stuffing her fist into a bag of enormous Mars bars, the kind that were only available around Halloween. Her parents had put her on a strict diet, or so I thought. So where had the candy bars come from? I looked nervously at the black tunnel ahead. "Hey guys," I smiled nervously. "Where'd you get that stuff?" "Nowhere." Brett and Holly responded in unison. Their flat tone reminded me of my own voice when I tried to describe the bargain I'd made. As it turned out, the remote control truck and bag of candy were only the beginning. Each time Eli and I came down to the sewer canal, Brett and Holly had more stuff: a Barbie mansion, the board game Candyland, even light-up sneakers. It was so unnerving that Eli and I stopped going down to play by the sewer canal. We were afraid of what we might find. Soon enough, we weren't the only ones. There was something ominous about the way the phone rang that night, and fear in my mother's eyes when she handed it to me. "It's your friend Holly." My mother whispered. "She sounds upset. I think her cat's missing. Have you seen it?" I could barely hear my mother's whispers over Holly's sobs. "Ariel's gone and she's never coming back," my friend was wailing. She named her cat after the Little Mermaid because she loved water. The name usually made me laugh, but not that night. "I can help you look for her," I stammered. "No, you can't," Holly moaned. "I found her collar by the sewer." "She's gone," another wail. My mother took away the phone, and I was left full of doubts. What had Ariel been doing down there? The next day, Holly walked sheepishly over to the abandoned lot where Eli and I were kicking a soccer ball into a trash can. "Can I play with you guys?" "What's wrong?" Eli sneered. "All out of other toys?" The can boomed as he scored a goal. "I'm not going down there anymore," Holly muttered. "First it was just my stuff that went missing, like my swimsuit and my house keys, but now that Ariel's gone." Holly couldn't say it, but I knew what she meant. She was scared of what might disappear next. For a long time, however, it seemed like nothing did. Brett, Holly, Eli, and I grew up. I forgot about dark sewer canals and abandoned lots, and instead spent more and more time inside on my computer. Eli went from a scrawny, scared kid to the star of our high school's soccer team. Holly grew into a clever, beautiful bookworm. Writing fantasy stories and fanfiction was her way of dealing with the terrible secret we shared. Brett never left that secret behind. Of the four of us, he was the only one who continued to visit the sewer canal on a regular basis. As a result, he seemed to get everything he wanted. But he lost his friends. By our freshman year, Brett was looking at Holly in a strange new way. It had been years since we'd last spoken, but he finally built up the courage to cross the lunchroom and talk to her. Holly," he stammered, "I know we haven't hung out in a while, but I really like you." And I thought that maybe, Brett trailed off. A hush fell over our table as we stared at the floor, our lunch trays anywhere but at our old friend. "I don't think it would work out, Brett," Holly finally answered. "I'm sorry." Brett turned crimson, clenched his hands into fists, and stormed off. After school, I knew exactly where he was going. By the time I caught up with Brett, he had already reached the sewer canal. "Brett, I know you think this will fix things, but you've got to listen to me, it won't." My old friend looked over his shoulder at me, shook his head, and crawled inside. I stepped forward to follow him, but the moment I looked into that tunnel, I was 9 years old again, swatting away freakish bugs, dragging my knees through the slime, listening to that horrible voice. Bounce. Bounce. No. I couldn't force myself to go in there a second time. And by the time Brett crawled back out, it would be too late. I stuffed my hands into my pockets and trudged home in the autumn twilight, feeling much older than I ever had before. I woke to a dark room and the echo of a ringing phone. I looked at the clock. 4:04 a.m. Full of foreboding, I sprinted to the kitchen and answered it before any of my family could wake up. "Oh God," Brett whispered, "this wasn't what I wanted." "It wasn't me. You've got to believe me. It wasn't me." The boom of a door flying open. A scream. The line went dead. I knew what had happened long before the trial, the news coverage, or the assembly the principal held about the terrible tragedy in our midst. And when Brett claimed he hadn't been the one who slit Holly's throat and placed her naked corpse in his bed that night, I was the only one who believed him. Years have passed since I chased Eli's basketball down that dark tunnel, but I still hear its bounce in my dreams. I try to tell myself that the voice in the sewers has already taken what it wanted from me, or that it might even have forgotten about me. But I know I'm wrong. How will I know when I've made my trade? When I try to stop my car and find the brake lines missing? When I check my 2-year-old son's crib and find it empty? Or will it be when I wake up back in that lightless concrete tube, naked and helpless, with that horrible voice whispering in my ear?